Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to the Cabinet Policy Development Working Group of Thursday the 10th of March. Apologies for absence. Obviously there is Councillor Clive Souter. Any others? Jodie?
I've not heard of any myself.
Okay. Right, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest in tonight's meeting?
No.
Okay. Item 3, minutes from pages 2 to 3 from the meeting we held on the 13th of January. Do we agree they are accurate?
Yes.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Any matters arising from those minutes?
No.
Okay, right. 5.
Apologies. Can I just, we've had apologies from Ash Malik as well.
Oh, okay. I haven't
Sorry.
heard from Ash, so I didn't know. Right, okay. Item 5 is the climate change strategy position statement. That's a mouthful,
Yep.
Which is on pages 4 to 18. Jane, are you doing the feedback on this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. And Alistair might, I think Alistair might want to say some words as well. So if that's okay.
Of
and
course
Michael's
it
here
is.
in case
No
there are
problem.
any technical questions.
Okay.
So we last looked at this back in the January meeting. I think it was January, so it might have been since then, later than then, where the themes and priorities were discussed and considered and agreed. And we said that we'd go away and develop the strategy further. So as we were doing that, it became apparent that there is a considerable amount of work to do and potentially a considerable resource requirement for the council. So it wasn't felt appropriate to rush a strategy so that it could come back to this meeting now. So the approach we've taken is to develop a position statement which sets out the priorities still as were agreed, but also sets out some of the work that we've done already, but the key challenges over the next few years. And the approach will be for a council-wide officer group to get together to consider the position statement, consider the priorities, consider the key challenges, and work to develop solutions to these and develop a full strategy, with the aim to bringing back a full strategy in the autumn of this year. So that's kind of where we are. Alistair, I think you probably want to add to that as well.
Thanks, Jane. And I think the main thing to add is that a great deal of work is going on this, and a great amount of thanks on my part go to Jane and her team, to Michael, who's on the call, but also to Andrew Bramage, who was involved in some of the initial thoughts on this as well. So thank you very much, Jane, for having moved this along. There's, I think, quite a lot of extra detail in there from when this last came before this group, and I'd note that the forward plan now has September as the proposed date for when we're going to have a fully fledged strategy of sorts. There's a huge challenge, obviously, on net zero, lots of opportunities as well that are going to touch, I think, all service areas. All portfolio holders will have to become net zero people for the decades ahead. And there is an opportunity, I think, a responsibility for any local authority to look at what it can do internally, but also for the area that it represents. And I think that's set out very well in this report, and sets out the many different areas we're going to have to grapple with, whether that's supporting businesses in the net zero transition through to Harlow's housing stock, including what role we can play to support private landowners as well as ourselves to get to where we need to go. So I'm also very grateful to Councillor Shona Johnson for the opportunity for us to put these ideas out there for scrutiny and for policy development. So I look forward to your questions, contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair, and thank you, Jane. Do we have any questions for either of them, both of them? Mike?
Just one here, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah, very, very challenging. I've always thought it was challenging, going back a couple of years, and I still think it's very challenging to do it. The only one I was going to pick up on is number 6, to promote reduction of emissions by businesses to net zero, supported by a successful green economy. Bearing in mind that Harlow has quite a large number of distribution businesses in the pinnacles, how difficult is that going to be? I know Amazon, the latest one, is going to use electric vehicles. But as I understand it, the workers come in their normal car, park up, and then jump into the distribution electric vehicles. But how difficult do you think that's going to be to get the businesses to go to net zero?
Shall I
Would you like me to
start, or do you want to? So I think it's going to be extremely challenging, I have to say. We've made a start. So Alistair is talking next week at the Business Forum. So that's organised by Harlow Council and has good attendance, bearing in mind it's only been going for a relatively short period of time. So although that might only be 30 or 40 businesses, it's still a start. We also aim to set up a business leaders group, so that will hopefully enable the council to talk to larger businesses and chief execs in the larger companies. And I think it's an ongoing dialogue with persuasion and influencing. And of course, lots of the bigger companies will also have their own climate change strategy with their own targets in. So it's a case of working together, persuasion, negotiation, and influence, I think.
Can I come back on that, Chair? Yeah, which is this one's probably more for Andrew and Michael. We don't know what's down the line as far as applications are concerned. We may get other distribution centres proposed for the Pinnacles or anywhere else. Is there something we can do as far as the local plan? We're going to look at the local plan and perhaps put something in there about that they need to provide electric vehicles in distribution centres. Is that something we can do?
Shall I answer that?
Yeah, I can come in as well, Mark. You go first. Yeah.
I think the government's going to require, it's going to legislate for the provision of car charging points. I'm not quite sure they're going to do that in commercial, though. It's just residential, I think. But yes, but having said that, electric vehicle charging points is just one small element of sustainability. There's all sorts of a raft of other things that could be doing, and it's always the thing. Every planning committee I go to, somebody always pipes up and says, "Are you going to put electric charging points in?" There's a lot more that could be done.
I was sorry, Chair. I was more, if I can cut across just 1 second, Andrew. I was more,
of course,
in the planning condition that they would have to have electric vehicles coming in and out of their depot. I understand Michael's point about charging points, and as far as planning, where I can or where we can in planning, we put single charging points in for new houses. But yes, it's the business use is where I was coming from.
Yeah, I get the point absolutely, Mark. I mean, at the moment, there would be no legal policy basis on which we could insist on that. For that to be a condition that the planning committee could levy on an applicant, there would have to be a policy statement for that. And at the moment, I don't think that the planning inspectorate would let us get away with making such conditions when there is not the ability for many businesses to be able to fulfil that. We know from the work that HTS has been doing, the difficulties for businesses in obtaining electric vehicles, particularly commercial vehicles. I think we're still a few years away from them being available in the mass market at a cost that would be affordable for most local businesses. So that's the direction of travel, pardon the pun, but that is where I think we will end up in a few years, that we will be making those sorts of requirements, but I don't think we're quite in a position to be able to do that yet.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Chairman.
You're more than welcome. Jodie, have you got a question?
Yes, please, Chair. I'm looking at the point number 5, and it has the following 7 key objectives for the climate strategy having been identified. And it's letter C, point C, to reduce consumption of resources, reduce waste, and increase reuse and recycling in Harlow. It's probably quite easy for a big firm or big company in an industrial site to sort of work it out by themselves about how to deal with that sort of stuff, reducing waste and increasing reuse. Would there be a sort of communication to just the ordinary resident, probably via, I don't know, Harlow Times or something like that? I was going to say via letter, but that's probably too much waste because it's using too much paper. But would there be some kind of tips for local households to increase reuse and recycling?
Yeah, I could comment on that. I mean, the council is working with district, borough and city councils across Essex and with the county council on waste management strategy, which is sort of taking on board current changes in government policy. And you know, a large part of that does rely on communication with residents. So probably not a one-off, but a sort of constant drip feed. And at the moment, you know, our main sort of thrust is getting people to recycle as much as possible by sort of nudging them with relatively small bins and so on. But I can see that we're moving on to the next stage, possibly with the, you know, replacement waste collection contract at the end of the current contract and so on. And in sort of several ways, that will probably have to evolve quite a lot from what we've currently got. So if your point is communication with residents, there is key. I certainly agree with that.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions? Okay, so our recommendations are on page 4, and it's recommended that we recommend to Cabinet that the attached statement is approved, and following development as indicated in the position statement, a draft climate change strategy be presented to Cabinet in autumn 2022. I think we can agree that's quite fine. Yep. Okay, excellent. Right, let's move on to item 6, which is the town plan, which is pages 19 to 37. Andrew, are you saying something on this?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick introduction, Chair, on this. Well, this obviously came to the working group last year, and since then, and then through cabinets, and since then we've had the first public consultation on this, which ran from middle of November through to the end of January, and we extended that consultation by a few weeks, partly because of it running over Christmas and COVID restrictions, and there were a number of requests from various organisations to have a bit more time, so we extended that to the end of January. Actually, I think we were quite pleased with the level of response. I mean, for a sort of planning related consultation, you know, to get 77 separate responses is very good. We've had far fewer than that on many other occasions. So, and I think the other thing I'd flag up with the consultation responses is that, you know, with consultations of this nature, which are not about a specific thing, but are about a long-term vision and about looking ahead 30 years, it is really difficult for a lot of people, most of us probably, to actually think that far ahead in the future and what sort of town we might want to be living in. But actually, we got some really sensible, helpful comments from this. So I think we were pleased not only with the nature, with the quantum of response, but the nature of that as well. Obviously, we all need to guard against, you know, responding to what one individual person or what one individual organisation says and extrapolating, you know, more broadly from that. But, you know, having said that, you know, there's been a good level of response here. What we're now going to do is reflect on all these comments, and the regeneration and planning teams will be working with the two respective portfolio holders over the next couple of months and looking at how we redraft the document. The draft that you saw last year and that went to Cabinet was just the first draft, to get some initial feedback. And there's some helpful pointers in here about how we might restructure the document, perhaps make it a bit more focused. You know, there were a lot of objectives in there, and can we rationalise that a bit and give it a bit more focus? So subject to further comment tonight, we will then work on that over the next couple of months for a further draft of this document to be produced. I would estimate in the early summer. Obviously, there's something called elections coming up, I believe, in the next few weeks. So we'll let that take its course and then look to bring back an updated draft of this document, as I say, probably in around June time, I think. But it would be good to get further comments from people this evening.
Thank you, Andrew. Mike or Jodie, have you got questions?
Yes, I've got one. With regard to the survey, there seem to be a lot of, well, quite a few non-applicable questions on there. I'm sort of kind of wondering why that is, if they were not applicable to the questionnaire. And will they be, is it because they'll be asked at a later date? Because a lot of these are actually really quite valid questions about housing, for example, and division for the town, I think it's in there somewhere. Just wondering why they were on there if they weren't sort of pertaining to the survey.
Yeah, I think it's probably lessons to be learned on the way some of the questions are structured, actually, because it probably indicates that some people weren't comfortable answering those questions because the questions maybe were too broad. When we set the questions, we tried to make them as open as possible, but sometimes that is difficult for people if you're not making it more specific. So, like that fourth, question there, what do you think the vision for the future of Harlow should be? Well, you could write an essay on that, couldn't you? And it's not the sort of thing that you could just give a one-word answer, or one-sentence answer to. So I think that's something I think we need to reflect on and think about how, when we do further consultation on this, can we hone down a bit more closely on what we want to get out of it. And and I suspect what one of the other things we'll want to do with this is to do consultation in different formats, given sort of the COVID restrictions that we had last year. It wasn't possible to do things like focus groups and workshops, but I think now we're more able to do that. So I think in the second phase of this work, that's where we'll, I think, be able to elicit more interesting responses from people, where we actually have a discussion with them rather than they just fill out a form.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andrew.
Mike, have you got a question? Unmic, Mike.
This point. Not really a question. I thought the answers were predictable, I suppose, in a way, because as Andrew said, you ask a question and you get the answer to that question. So it's whether the questions are the right questions in the first place. But you've got to start somewhere, and I think it's perhaps a sieving process. We can take what we've got, sieve it. Some of those are already our priorities, so which is good. So I think overall, it's there has been a benefit from it. Although there's a lot of paperwork there. Housing, as Jodie said, housing is a main. But then that's what most residents in Harlow are concerned about, is housing. But it's not necessarily the number one priority, but it's a priority along with a lot of others, like sustainable transport. So I think we're on our way to starting on the what's needed. But I think we've got a long way to go yet. So I think, as Andrew said, we come back in 6 months' time with a revised. We might be able to knuckle it down a bit more to specifics, because it's a lot to take in when you've got, say, 10, 15 pages. So that's not a question; it's a comment, I suppose.
Yeah, I know that's helpful, Mark. And I think you're right that a lot of the answers were perhaps the sort of thing we were expecting, or at least hoping anyway. And I think it's pleasing to think that most of the responses that we had were along the lines of, supporting the general direction of Harlow in terms of seeing growth, but also ensuring that, the existing facilities for the existing residents of the town are upgraded and that the existing town benefits from that growth. That was coming across quite clearly in the responses, I think.
Mike Hardware.
Thank you, Chair. The original idea with the town plan, you can never give people a blank sheet of paper and say, right, what do you want to see in 25 years? Because they'll just look at you blankly and say, well, I don't know, what's the options? So you've always got to give them something as a basis to start the cogs whirring on the various topics. So that's what we did. I mean, some of the questions in there, we got expected responses, but there's quite a few valid comments in there which will mould how we redraft it. And it's not going to be 6 months, Mike. It's going to be June. So that's 4 months, I think. Yeah.
If we're going to be pedantic, it's actually 3.
3.
Well, I looked on June as the 6th month.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, no, just make sure before I jump out. So our recommendation is on page 19, and basically you just keep working on it, to be honest. Good luck. Right, item 7 is the work plan. And when I look at the work plan, we've had an awful lot of reports this year, but I think as a committee, we have done a really, really good job of putting everything that we wanted on there, and everyone that has contributed or made comments. I think we've certainly given the senior leadership team and cabinet councillors things to think about for the coming fiscal year. And I'm sure whoever takes over from me at the next Cabinet Policy Development Working Group, because this is my last meeting as chair, will sit and do a really good job of carrying on with where you were from this year. So I'd obviously like to thank all the councillors that have been on the group with me, all the senior officers who have contributed to the many reports that I've had to read. So thank you very much. I'd also like to have a massive thank you to Lisa, Hannah and Adam for putting up with my constant stream of emails so for the last year. So there are no matters of urgent business, I'm assuming. So from me, I am signing off officially as a councillor as well, because I am not standing this year. So if I see you in the town, I will wave and say hello. But other than